Well, in my house, it's a completely different ball game. If you walk in here, I'm gonna one leg hop and shoot you in the face. That's a wrap.
What's the most efficient path to victory against this particular opponent?
He's dropping off for the choke here. We could see the finish. It's looking tight. Tight at Alpra.
Hey guys, welcome to the Everyday Jiu Jitsu podcast. I'm your host, Matt Kwan. The Everyday Jiu Jitsu podcast is everything you need to know about Jiu Jitsu. Today, I have a very special guest, my good buddy, Seb Lavoie. Welcome to the show,
Thanks,
Seb.
brother. Thank you for having me.
It is my pleasure. And guys, if you want to support the show, check out the links in the bottom. You can leave donations to my PayPal, or you can go to the online store and buy some Everyday Jiu-Jitsu merch. Right now, I think it's still essential Jiu-Jitsu merchandise. We're currently in the process of switching over our brand. And if you want to get some of the old merchandise, you could probably still order it, which will be unavailable soon. We're going to switch everything to the new branding. But I've trained with Seb. He also lives in the Vancouver area. We came up through the ranks together. We actually were part of the same team at one point. And then, he is a jiu-jitsu black belt. He went off to another team. I started my gym, and now, we've always kind of stayed in touch. And Seb's a good friend of mine. I was there for his black belt ceremony, and he's got quite the story. I've had him on the podcast before on the old show, BJJ Mental Models. I've never had him on my show, I don't think, although we have done live streams. And Seb, why don't you just go ahead and explain who you are and what you do?
Yeah, man. My name is Seb Lavoie, and I'm now a performance coach that does all kinds of other things, including guest speaking engagement, a lot of coaching of athletes and individuals and people that are non-athletes, essentially to optimize their capacity to do life, so to speak. And so I do a lot of that right now at the moment. I'm also wrapping up a Master's of International Security. I have a thesis left and I am done. So I do some counterterrorism analyst duties at the moment, which is fairly recent. So I'm certainly not well versed in it, but it's coming. I do, a variety of other things. Like I do overseas security in high risk areas. I do close protection, all kinds of stuff. So there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of irons in the fire, so to speak.
Cool. And you are, sorry. Can you explain your previous career, what your position was and everything for the folks who don't know?
Sure, I can. So I spent 23 years of combined service between the military and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the RCMP. I spent 16 years in the tactical space, 12 years as a full-time SWAT guy, so to speak, 7 years as a team leader, and I retired as the British Columbia Divisional Sergeant Major for British Columbia.
So pretty much an all-around badass warrior. Like I said, jiu-jitsu black belt. For those who want to hear some of Seb's old stories, definitely check out the episode that we did on BJJ Mental Models. Still one of my favorite podcasts I've ever done. So highly recommend that you check that out. Okay, Seb, recently you've gone through some crazy shit in your life. And it all kind of started with a surgery on your leg. And today I was hoping to kind of dive into it, talk about what you're going through, what you want to go through, over these next couple years, your goals and things like that. Can you tell us what exactly you went through? What would it be now? It'd be well over a year now, right? Like about 2 years ago, I would say. 3 years
it's
ago?
almost two and a half years ago now, or close to. Anyways, it was in August of 2021. And so I'll make it somewhat brief because the story's been told so many times. But I was having a
sorry about that.
Absolutely. I was having a normal, minor surgery. Unfortunately, I'm a victim of having a higher pain threshold and the ability to take a little bit more pain. And I didn't realize that the pain that I was under was abnormal. And for the longest time, I was going into compression and essentially developing compartment syndrome, which is a condition where the muscle starts swelling and it exceeds the capacity of the fascia to exceeds the capacity of the fascia. And then what it does is it, of course, constrict blood vessels to the nerves, to the muscles, all of those things. I stayed in compression for about 26 hours, which led to my left calf muscle to die, essentially. And over the course of 2 months, I had 9 surgeries called debridement to remove dead tissue out of my left leg. And then I was sort of recovering for the following 2 years. And so during the 2 years that I was recovering, nerves regenerated about an inch a month. And so I had 14 inches of nerves removed. So we were looking at, roughly 14 months before I would optimize the recovery. And at that time, we would be able to make an assessment whether or not chronic pain and functionality were optimized. And that's precisely what happened. We took 2 years, we let it recover, we let it rebuild. And after 2 years, I was experiencing incredible chronic pain, and I was also experiencing a lack of functionality. And that of course, as somebody that's really active, that was something that was very sort of unacceptable for me. So I opted for an elective amputation, which happened this year in 2024 on January 8th. So about a month ago, I finally got my left leg trans-tibial amputation, so below the knee amputation, removed. And now it's all out recovery.
Yeah. So, excuse me. A lot of people who might hear this story, they hear about the first surgery, which was incredibly painful. Like, I remember when you were going through this, being in contact with you, and you saying, like, Matt, like, this pain it's beyond 10. It's the craziest pain. I'm basically in like the pits of hell right now. It's pain I couldn't have imagined. And then prolonging that with, 9 surgeries over did you say 2 months? Just constantly cutting you open, trying to fix it. So there's, aside from the physical pain, there's also the mental aspect where you're wondering, is this going to get better? Can my leg be salvaged? I don't know what my future looks like. This is like anyone who's as active as you. For those of you who can't see, Seb is like basically a Marvel superhero, the way this guy is built. He's a CrossFit, very high level CrossFit athlete. Like I said, BJJ black belt. Athletics is just like me. Athletics is part of your life. And this is like one of the biggest fears, I think, of any athlete is to go through something like that, where now your life is altered. You can't continue the things that you wanted to do. And aside from just the physical pain, there's the mental aspect now where you're questioning, what does your life look like going from here? It took a couple of years before you really could even make the decision to choose to amputate the leg, which you've chosen to amputate it. So for those who don't know, it's basically below the knee, right? It's below the knee, so you still have your knee, and then gone from that point down. So, people who might think of this, they think, well, this guy got a voluntary amputation. That's fucking crazy. Like, I couldn't imagine doing that. But then I tell them, yeah, but you don't realize first of all, you don't realize the mindset of Seb Lavoie. This guy has told me before the reason for his choice, and if I'm not mistaken, it's because, if your leg isn't functional to a certain degree, then it's basically just dead weight, and it's going to hold you back. And so, there's things that you still want to accomplish in life. You've told me off air, things like perhaps getting back into competitive, martial arts or CrossFit, or even just day-to-day training. And you made the choice to remove the leg just because that was holding you back. Am I correct?
Yeah, dude, absolutely. I mean, I want to do life ultimately without, take the competing out of that. Competing is just something to keep me uncomfortable, right? So that I don't grow roots into comfort, which is the place where growth goes to die. That is one piece of that. But the rest of it, and the primary reasons is for me to live life the way I love to live life, which is an adventurous life. I want to be climbing the mountains in Iceland. I want to be traveling the world. I want to be, running and jumping and training the way I like to train. I want to be doing all of those things. And unfortunately, even though the chronic pain may not change, the functionality piece is what was impeding me during this this last 2 years. And so having a prosthetic in 2024, things are pretty good in that realm, right? So having a prosthetic that's built upon provided specs and have the ability to do things that I want to do is critical, and that's going to be a game changer for me. Having the ability to dive with my prosthetic, having the ability to climb with my prosthetic, to run, to jump, to do all those things. Those are all things that for the last 2 years have been completely stopped. So I worked around it, and I worked the other areas of my bodies. I did all this in my mind, did all of this stuff to maintain everything else, because you want to be a multi-dimensional individual. So for me, even though I was very physically engaged, it was just one piece of who I was. It did not define me. There was so much more to me. So I reinvested in all those other areas that perhaps at time were neglecting a little bit, because I was training so much, doing all those things so much. And so it gave me an opportunity to step up for myself, to round myself out in a variety of different dimensions of my personality. And so there were some advantages to this situation. But ultimately, 2 years ago when this happened, on surgery number 4, I asked the doctor, could you remove the leg and we get going with life? And he refused, because, and it was the right call. He refused because he wanted to see if we could optimize a recovery and potentially salvage the leg. And I understand that, and it was the right call. But this just kind of shows and exemplifies the mindset that I had at the time. I was already sort of willing to part with it so that I could move on.
Okay, so I think based on what you just said, you're about to answer you've already answered my next question, which was it a difficult decision for you?
No, it was not. I mean, in the sense that if I take the totality of the circumstances at the time, it was not. I mean, if you think of yourself, and if your listeners are at home listening to this and they're healthy and they have healthy legs and everything, that would be a very difficult decision. In fact, it's a decision you should never have to make. But in light of my circumstances, it was, to me, a decision that was just common sense. Like, I want to do the things, I cannot do the things. The leg is completely compromised, which compromises the rest of me, which compromises my ability to do life in the way that I want to. Let's do this. I had no issues. Now, I think it's important, because it'd be a little bit disingenuous to not mention this. Like, if had this happened in the peak of my career or before I retired, when I was wanting to go to the teams, when I was training to do tactical operations, all of those things, it would have been a very different predicament. I was retired at the time. Like, I had just retired. And when I say retired, I mean that in a, from an operational standpoint and from an organizational standpoint. I mean, if you look at, if there's something that as important as this was to me, my career, for example, and how obsessive I was about, and transpose this to jiu-jitsu, for example, if somebody is, wanting to take over the world in jiu-jitsu, and they have managed to have a very, very successful competitive career, and they're now removed from that career, and something like that happens, well, timing is better than if it happened before their competitive career was in full swing, right? And so for me, from an emotional and mental standpoint, it was a lot easier to bear, on account of all of the things that I've ever wanted to engage in from an operational standpoint were already behind me.
After the incident with the compartmental syndrome, and you came home and you were, quote, healing after this round of surgeries, you did return to the mats. You were training, and you always told me, you felt very compromised. Can you describe what training was like with a dead leg, and also, post-training, what it felt like trying to get through with that condition after, let's say, jiu-jitsu class or, working out?
Yeah. So I did a lot of strength and conditioning, but I worked around the systems a lot. And then when I hit the mats, which is one of my favorite things to do, what I found was two things. A, when I wasn't wearing the shoes, and if you look at some of my, say, social media posts, you'll see me working out in combat boots. There was a reason why I did that, because it hurt. If my leg didn't have the proper support, it really hurt, and it created neurological or neuropathy or neurological pain. And it was, not quite unbearable, but it was very, very severe. And so one of the things that I experienced, even when I was teaching jiu-jitsu classes or when I was rolling with people, was that because I was bare feet, it really hurt to even stand without doing anything, let alone, engaging in the jiu-jitsu. Now, I love to start all my matches standing up. As a law enforcer and somebody that used jiu-jitsu for combatives purposes, I always like to start my roles standing. And that was something that was taken out of the picture. I wasn't able to do that, of course, just on account of A, I couldn't even stand properly, but B, I was going to hurt my leg even more, and that wasn't a prospect I was ready to accept. But also, I had fun during the role. I felt almost normal, and some people have mentioned like you don't feel that much different, but what would happen after was, and so the neurological pain that I was feeling during the role was sort of muted, so to speak, as I was engaged in the role. But then after, neurological pain was atrocious, and I'd spend 2-3 days without walking. And so eventually what happened, I would walk, obviously, but I was not comfortable walking. And so eventually what happened is it kind of took a toll on my love for rolling, just on account of how I felt after. So I really refrained from doing it. I did it every 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and I did it once. I had a few good rolls, and I was hurting. I was in a lot of pain after. And so during that time, there were some events that I had to attend. Like I went to the We Defy Foundation in the States, for example. There was this big, organization that rehabs veterans through jiu-jitsu. And there was an ambassador meeting, and there was all these high-level black belts from the special operation community. And I'm in there, and I'm like, screw it. I'm rolling with everybody, right? Well, 6 rolls in, I was done. And also I was done for a month after that, And so the only thing on my mind was, baby Jesus, just don't let me embarrass myself, kind of thing. Because if you either can roll or you can't roll. So if you're injured, you can't be like, oh, I'll engage in this, but I'm injured. It was just, so I went and did it and loved it at the time, but I paid dearly for that.
Mm-hmm. How was the most recent surgery, so the actual leg amputation, how is that compared to your first bout of surgeries, pain-wise, your mental state? How can you contrast those two experiences for us?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what I would say is the 9 surgeries they were difficult, man. And the reason why that was the case is this was my new reality all of a sudden. I found myself in a completely different world. And also, I was by myself in Toronto. There was nobody with me. So I was by myself the entire time. And I actually liked that because it allowed me the time to introspect and really make some critical decisions. Now, also, there was another side to this, which was, the pain medication and the way this affected me while in the hospital in Toronto. And so sometimes being by myself, I couldn't be the best advocate for myself because I was so high on all these pain meds that it created some issues. Every time I went into surgery, I would come out of there with my legs smaller, and the muscles removed because they would take layers of muscles within the calf compartment. And on the second to last surgery, I had a skin graft. So for those that don't know, I have like a $30,000 tattoo on my leg. Like my left leg is completely tattooed by one of the best artists in the world. And they took a strip, like a 3.5-inch strip off my thigh, and they removed that and they did skin graft on the bottom of my leg. And my calf, which I was supposed to keep some of because they were confident that some part of that calf would be healthy, well, wasn't the case. So I essentially wake up on surgery number whatever, and my calf is half the size that it should be, and my tattoo is all screwed up because the skin graft was done, and the skin graft is probably one of the most painful part of that process as well. Now, compare this to the amputation on January 8th of this year. This has been a 2-year ordeal. I can't wait to get this done. Like, I can't wait to get this thing removed so that I can start engaging in the recovery process so that I can optimize life in the next year or 6 months or whatever that is. I entered that in a very different mindset, although I was very accepting of what was going on, 2 years ago. This was something I had chosen. Now, there's a bit of
you had control,
some to a certain extent, right? And also there is another piece to this. I think it's worth mentioning. So when I initially saw a surgeon for the amputation, most of the surgeons that I saw didn't see eye to eye with me with the elective amputation. And the reason for that was they simply didn't understand me. They didn't understand my kind. They didn't understand my mindset. They didn't understand any of this. So they would look at me and say, you can walk. You're good to go. And I was like, no, I'm not. I'm not good to go because that's not how I want to do life. And so they were very reluctant. So what ended up happening is I was recommended to a surgeon. I show up there within 5 minutes of being in her office. She was willing to amputate me, or she suggested a mid-thigh amputation. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with this, a mid-thigh amputation and a trans-tibial amputation are galaxies apart in terms of how difficult it is to recover, how you can do life after, the cost of the prosthetic. I mean, we're talking like $100,000 difference between prosthetics, and a variety of different things. As far as like the recovery process and as far as your functionality after the amputation. So that's a massive deal. But turns out it was a Friday afternoon and she found some reasons to do a mid-thigh amputation. Now, thankfully, I'd done a ton of research. I was well versed in what I was asking her to do and how I would prefer it being done. And after sort of challenging her respectfully a few times, she decided to recommend me to another surgeon. That surgeon turned out to be a former UK special operations surgeon and would perform 400 trans-tibial amputation between Iraq and Afghanistan. When I met this dude for the first time, Paul Hindles is his name, an absolute savage. And for those of you who are familiar with the Reorg Foundation in the UK, Mark Omrod, who has 3 limbs missing, the first triple amputees, former Royal Marines, same surgeon. Paul Hindle used to be in the UK, now lives in Canada, and she sends me to him. And so I walk in his office, I tell him what the deal is about the leg and everything, and he immediately understands me. He's worked with guys like me his entire career. He knows exactly what this is all about. So he immediately agrees to perform the amputation, immediately starts thinking and problem solving the things that are going to be helping me recover the lifestyle that I'm after. He did a fantastic job on the stump. Like the stump looks really good. Everything, he's filled in gaps with some muscle that was still in there. He's made it nice and round so that it can fit in a prosthetic and all of this good stuff. So when I came to and I saw my leg, I was absolutely elated. I was all joy, man, because I'd seen so many stumps. I'd seen so many residual limbs that looked horrible, that I semi-expected that to be the case with me and having to adjust to having an ugly limb that you basically, try to hide from everybody. But really what ended up happening is they made it beautiful. They made it beautiful. They made it functional in the sense that it's going to help me get into my prosthetic, do all this good stuff. And so my mindset between the two was a feeling of relief and a feeling of I can finally move forward. Whereas, in Toronto, it was more it's getting worse and worse and worse as each surgery is occurring.
Yes. I think only you would look down after having your leg removed and be elated. I mean, it kind of like people don't know you. I'm fortunate to know you personally, and I kind of look at you and I'm like, this guy's basically like a wolf, like someone who, they get their leg caught in a rock and they're like, fuck it, I got to chew my leg off now because that's just what it is. And it's, I know if I was in that situation, I would, I don't think I'd be taking it as well as you. But it just speaks to your character and your mindset. And again, I've done workouts with Seb before, and he was being very, very nice to me during these workouts, and I was still suffering like crazy. This guy is a incredible glutton for punishment. He, that's I think the reason why one of the reasons why you wanted that leg gone so you could return is just so you could get more punishment, just so you could you could be more uncomfortable. A lot of people, just by human nature, I think we seek comforts in life, and our society nowadays is dominated by comfort and convenience, whereas you go the other direction. You seek discomfort, you seek struggle. And again, it just speaks to your character. Do you ever think about, when you went to Toronto to get the surgery, because that's where you went, right? Like
Correct.
they didn't fly you to Toronto after that. You went there to get the first surgery,
correct.
right? Do you ever think about that day and just in a moment you're like, man, I wish I could go back and just not do that? Does that thought cross your mind?
Yeah, from an emotional standpoint, that I think is an expected and natural reaction, right? Because you look back and you've created something, you did something really minor, but you created something major as a result of that. Now you're looking down at your leg. But I think that's an oversimplification. The way I override this is essentially logically, right? So I go back in time and I remake the risk assessment associated with the first surgery. And I look at all of the factors that I considered at the time before I made a decision, an informed decision to get the surgery. And I look back and I go, would the odds of this going wrong be more elevated than what I initially assessed them as? And the answer is no. So what happened to me was 1 in 4 million. About that is what they're suggesting, right? And so how was I to know that? And so even if you don't know the outcome, you can't start reverse engineering something that went wrong on account of what you know now. It doesn't work that way. And so for me, it's about reasonableness of action. If I jumped the guns and just went and did some random surgery, with no prior research and no prior knowledge and no prior risk assessment, I would be beating myself up right now. But because I'd done all I could, and by all account, it was extremely safe, I can't beat myself up for doing that, because ultimately take the outcome that we know away from this equation and I would do it all over again. It's that simple. And so that's where emotional reaction needs to be logically overridden. It's no different than imposter syndrome. It's no different than a variety of different things. What do you bring to the table? What decisions have you made on account of what information? All of those things. And so every time that my emotional self starts self-pitying, thinking about shoulda, coulda, woulda, all I have to do is to return in time, do the risk assessment again, and I come to the exact same conclusion. I would do it all over again.
Mm-hmm. And, talking about like going back and changing the past or whatever, if possible. Oh my God, this fucking cat is... What? You're in the shot now. I would pick him up, but I just got PRP in my shoulder 2 days ago, and I shouldn't be complaining to you about pain, but I can't lift my right arm right now. Where was I going with that? Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, imagine you went with that first surgeon, and she wanted to cut your leg off from the thigh down. And then you went in and did your own research and you found a guy who did, the surgery that you wanted and it turned out better than you could have hoped for. I mean, there's multiple takeaways for me from that, like doing your own research, getting a second opinion. I think too many times, just the average person will just trust whatever their doctor says, or if they need a surgery, they'll trust whatever their surgeon says. Whereas you were like, I know the pros and cons of that, and I have something else in my mind. So I want to challenge the professional and get a second opinion. Like, do you ever think for a second, like, wow, what if I did that procedure instead, just because that's what the first professional opinion suggested? And I bet there's a feeling of thankfulness and relief that you didn't go through with that you sort of went that extra step and you found the surgeon that you eventually went with.
Yeah, dude. And I actually didn't research this guy. She recommended him. So that to me is call it whatever you want, but nothing happens by accident. There was a reason why that unfolded the way it did. But you are correct in that advocating for yourself in any medical field or in anything that you're engaging in is critical, because if you don't, you are going to find yourself on the wrong end of a bad decision. And I can tell you, I probably saved myself 17 times in that 2 years by knowing what I was talking about and by doing enough research. And when I say research, I'm not talking about Facebook research. I'm talking about reading academic papers over academic papers and trying to find something that rebutted it and really establishing a critical analysis on what it is that we are going through. And so I was doing that not so that I could go to the doctor and say, you know what, I know you did 7 years of university, but I got this figured out, because that's not the case. But so that I would be able to at least have an sort of an opinion on things and say, what about this? What about that? What about this? And dude, like, I can safely say that I did that with my anesthesiologist like 3 times. They would say, we would like to do this and this. I'm like, can you combine those two? And they're like, actually, that's a great idea. Let's do that. And if the professionals if you have the right professionals and they don't feel threatened because they're not insecure professionals, they work with you. It's like, oh, that's actually, you know what? That's actually viable for you. Yeah, great idea. And my doctors along the way were actually quite good. But my fear is, if this is your mom, if this is your grandma, if this is your dad, or if what, and say now start adding complexities to this, such as, say, a language barrier or any of those things. How do you ensure that your loved ones are receiving the care that they should be receiving, and they're not being shortcutted, they're not being, and so it's something that really opened my eyes on the possibility of that being very frequent and occurring very often. And so we need to be on the ball. We need to be there. Now, I'll tie something else in there. On this most recent surgery, I had my girlfriend Alexandra there, and she is an absolute savage. And what happened with Alex is that I found myself way over medicated. Okay. And I was given so much opiates right after the operation that I was essentially useless. I couldn't formulate a sentence. I was like a 5-year-old. And one of the nurses came over, and I was complaining of a lot of pains. I was tearing up. I was, showing all the signs that somebody that has a high pain threshold shouldn't be showing. But I was not yelling. I was not doing any of this. And so the nurse was there, and she's like, oh, he must not be in compression again because he's not showing pain. And Alex was like, listen, this is the reason why he's here in the first place, because he doesn't yell. He doesn't, do those things. And so last time he was dismissed and discounted on account of the pain that he was suffering, because he wasn't demonstrating, a lot of outwards behavior. He goes internal when he's in pain. So you need to realize that if he is in pain and tears are flowing down his face, something is wrong. And so she advocated for that. And the next morning we had a lineup of professionals coming in to do some testing on me. Well, what happened was they had put a nerve catheter or a nerve block inside my leg. And this is something they had done pre-surgery. But following the surgery, as it turns out, the nerve block was not working. And so what happened was I was raw dogging an amputation for 24 hours. And that is a absolutely catastrophic prospect from a pain management standpoint. And so they realized that I was raw dogging the amputation. They get me into pain clinic or whatever right away, and then they do a nerve block on me. They stopped the pain to the point where I didn't need to take any meds, not even Advils, right? Because that nerve block that was supposed to be in there in the first place was never there. And so it's not just about you advocating for yourself, but it's you. If your cognitive abilities are compromised, can somebody else do that for you? And do they understand you enough to be able to do that? And I was very grateful, because in Toronto, that wasn't the case. And so, my suggestion to anybody that's listening is, you're dealing with an injury that has a lot of potential to escalate. Regardless how smart you are, how well-read you are, or how knowledgeable you are, at some point you may be compromised enough that you can't advocate for yourself. So it's good to have somebody that's that person that you can't steamroll over, that's not a welcome mat, that will essentially respectfully and with knowledge of you and the intervention that you just went through, be able to advocate for you as you're negotiating the medical system, because otherwise you are going to find yourself on the wrong end of that system.
Do you get phantom pain?
So yes, the answer is yes. Phantom pain is one of the weirdest thing I've ever experienced in my life. And for example, my stomp might be in my hand, and I feel pain on my foot 3 foot down on the ground, and I don't have a foot, right? And the pain is real. It's like my foot's in a fire and it's burning, and I can't remove it from the fire. When you first feel heat, you generally autonomously, you'll just pull your foot out. But for me, it feels like my foot is in the fire and remaining in the fire, burning. And so at night, it was causing me a lot of issues. But thankfully, a lot of the modalities that I engage for my recovery are fighting phantom pain. And so now I'm on week 4 or starting week 5 or something, and my phantom pain is very minimal. Last night, I had none. The night before, I had none. And it is just increasingly getting better, which is absolutely terrific news.
What is life like as you're adjusting to being an amputee? Like, what is, your day-to-day life? I'm not even sure. Have you returned to jiu-jitsu at all? Like, what are your workouts like?
Yeah, so no, jiu-jitsu not yet. So jiu-jitsu I need to wait another 2 weeks. And the reason for that is they reattach tendons to bones. And so we need to make sure that those tendon connections are, firmed up before I start putting pressure down there. And even when I do, there isn't going to be a purple belt Div 1 wrestler role for quite some time, right? Like this is going to have to be selected partners that are capable of, obviously, of being sensible, but also capable of controlling their weight, having enough sort of situational awareness to know where they are in relation to the leg and all of those things. And so when I first start in 2 weeks, it's going to be guys like you, Sean Albright, Alex to a certain extent, people that I trust that are going to sort of keep me safe, but also help me get back in the game. Right. My workouts, I started working out again. That's been an awesome relief. It's been really sort of fun. If I may say, it's kind of like tying a white belt all over again, and I just love that challenge. It's been really fun to learn to balance, and your body does that very quickly. I think one of the weirdest thing that I've experienced post amputation is trying to pee on one leg, dude, in the middle of the night. Like that's a different level of hard, and within a couple weeks, within 2 weeks, I was straight up and no vibration, no shaking, no swaying, no nothing, right? Because your center of gravity has changed now. So it's very different. But the body is an incredible machine. Oftentimes, it will not do anything that you want it to do until it has to. And then when it does it, automatically, essentially. And so I am learning to enjoy doing things with that. Now, one of the things that I really like is it made muscle up so much easier because I have a leg missing now. but I've been doing a lot. And so now what I did, so for the last 2 years, I was training a lot of strength and conditioning, but I was doing mostly strength biased. It was very much not in a hypertrophy or not like in a bodybuilding way, but just in a strength building way, because I knew I was going to return to the functional fitness side of things, which is more in line with, being an operator, doing all this stuff. And I wanted that, but I couldn't because my central nervous system couldn't take it. And so what I did for the last 2 years is build enough strength. Then as soon as I'm able to, I can go back to functional training and be good to go. So I did my first functional training workouts in the last 2 years, over the last couple of days. And we posted some little reels or whatever, and people really enjoyed them. But it's been absolutely awesome to get back to that. And I can't wait to, continue down that road. And especially getting back on the mats, which is 2 weeks and counting.
So in 2 weeks, you're going to make a return to
Correct.
the mats?
Yeah.
When you do make a return, are you going to modify your gi pants? Like, are you going to pin it so that it's tied off, or what's the?
Yeah.
Is that your plan?
See, I've been toying with this for a variety of different reasons, because my plan is, and again, this is just little details, right? I guess because I can do no gi, I can do whatever, right? Like, it really doesn't matter, but I do enjoy the gi. I believe what I'll do, because I have so many gis, I'll just do half of them and have the leg cut where my stomp is. I have a specific sock and something waterproof that I can put kind of over the stomp. So, if people are a little bit more sensitive to somebody not having, just be respectful with my partners. Some people are, freaked out by somebody having a stomp or whatever. So I will make sure that's covered with something, and I will go from there. But I think I will keep half of my pants with the length, because if I do combatives training, or if I decide to do takedowns from the standing, I'm going to do it with my prosthetic on. And so there's a way to do that safely. I'm currently working at developing something that I can put over my prosthetic so that there's no exposed hard surfaces. I mean, it'd be no different than a shin, really, but there are some pieces that could hurt someone. So I'm going to make sure that I have something that I could put on, like maybe a neoprene sleeve or something that will allow me to do takedowns from the standing. And when that's the case, my next step is either judo or boxing. But I want to start something else. I want to do something else, in line with just the martial pursuit.
Do you ever during the day just sit and like miss your leg? Do you ever miss it? Do you ever and are there like specific times that kind of trigger that emotion where you're like, man, like I miss my leg?
Yeah, dude. Something that's been very different for me is I can't remember in my adult life a time where I felt vulnerable. And I don't mean vulnerable from an emotional standpoint or anything like that. I mean physically vulnerable, where I'm here and I'm like, if somebody decides to tackle me from behind, it's going to be a bad day, right? Like some crackhead in Vancouver or whatever the case may be. And those are things that I have to think about now. I can't just hop on one leg and be like, well, I'm a BJJ black belt. I've done Muay Thai for years. I was an operator, all this stuff, because that's who you used to be. And I think it's quite easy to fall in the trap of thinking that you're the same guy. And a big part of me is, and my brain certainly is, and my mindset is, but unfortunately, physically, I'm not right now. When I have a prosthetic that's solidly affixed to my leg and all this stuff, then bring it, right? But it was very strange for me to find myself as an adult in a position of vulnerability. And it's interesting because there's a piece that's a little bit selfish about that, because there's a lot of people walking around like that. There's a lot of people that don't engage in combative sports. There's a lot of people that are older. There's a lot of people that have, physical predisposition, or that don't train in a certain way, or people that simply just don't do this stuff. I don't know that they are as aware of the risk as I am, just in relation to, having spent 20 years in policing. And I think that that's probably a saving grace. When they say ignorance is bliss, that's probably helping them. But for myself, I'm very aware of that. And so I think that that's been a bit of a problem, in the sense that, man, I wish I had my legs. So if this goes squarely, I can do the things that I can do. Additionally, I used to absolutely adore sprinting. I adore sprinting. I don't love running, but I'm a, fast twitch muscle from freaking head to toe. And I absolutely love sprinting. And that is the one thing that makes me miss my leg the most. When I'm sitting there and I watch somebody sprinting as fast as they can. I was watching Pat McNamara, a former Delta Force guy. He's like 56 years old and incredible physical condition. And he was running sprints, and I was watching my social, and all of a sudden I had this pit in my stomach. When am I going to be able to sprint again? That kind of stuff. Generally speaking, though, I've accepted my new reality, because as soon as you start sort of imposing your old self to your new reality, now you start mixing the emotions, and you start doing weird things that are playing with your head. And so for me, that is who I used to be, and this is who I am now, and how do we move forward from here, as opposed to, but I used to. And I call, in the tactical world, we call those guys the I used to. Everybody's an I used to. I used to do this, I used to do that, but you're not doing anything right now. And so you're only as good as the last thing you did. And I think a lot of people let who they used to be define who they are now. And it doesn't work. Simply doesn't.
So again, you've already answered what was going to be my next question, which was, do you feel vulnerable being an amputee? And just, you're just from your, just being an operator and your previous career, I know everywhere you go, you're thinking tactically. You're thinking, okay, where are my exits? And what if a threat came here? What if I was threatened? And so, this must be a time for you where, there must be times where you feel like, hey, if something were to go down right now, how am I going to defend myself? How am I going to defend my family, my home, my dog, whatever? And I guess having Achilles, which is a Belgian Malinois, which for those who don't know is basically like a high level dog that they use in special operations, right? My buddy had one, basically the Ferrari of dogs. Does having Achilles there kind of reassure you, knowing that he's got your back if someone walks through that door?
Well, in my house, it's a completely different ball game. If you walk in here, I'm gonna one leg hop and shoot you in the face. That's a wrap. But I'm just kidding. I mean, obviously, not everything is a lethal threat, but just going for the shock value here. But no, Achilles is a good dog, and he is. But I don't know how I would rely on him to sort of defend me. Like if I had a cane corso or a Kangol with 900 pounds of bite force or anything like that, like I would kind of dogs that can kill 5 wolves, I'd be all over it, and I'd have zero issue. But as far as a deterrent is concerned, it certainly is. Like Achilles looks intimidating, even though he is a bit smaller, and Malinois generally are, but he does look intimidating enough that people, will stay away, generally speaking. One of the things that I've been toying with is exactly what you spoke about earlier, though. What would I do, and how would I do it? And so for me, I think that as soon as I can close the distance, I would be safe. My problem is, like, say, being tackled from behind or something like that. And even if I did that, I could still use some sort of guard retention with the one leg, kick ups and freaking lumberjack sweeps and everything to try to get on top and do the things. Or if I found myself in a situation where I had to go hands on with somebody, I would essentially latch myself onto them, body lock, whatever, something. And as soon as I do that and take the space away from them, they're a lot less threatening to me at that point, right? Unless they're obviously, a jiu-jitsu freaking savage, right? Like, because then it's a bit of a different story. Then my advantage is not so much a tactical advantage. But if I'm talking about, hot-headed doofus in the lineup at Walmart or wherever else, and I have to go hands-on for one reason or another, or I have to step up to defend somebody or do something, I'm going to close that gap, in a surreptitious way, and essentially make contact to the point where I can control them and not let them get away from me, because my mobility is what's restricted the most right now. Now, with the stump being, so sensitive in that, I'm mindful that if I did that and I end up falling on the stump, which I already did twice, but in a say violent way, it could create issues. But I mean, at that point, if I had to make a move, at that point, I think we know that something was going bad enough that it had to be done anyway. So they can get me back into surgery and fix my leg, kind of deal. But
yeah. So right now you say the stump is pretty sensitive?
Yeah, it's still pretty sensitive, but I've engaged a whole bunch of modalities to make this better. And one of the things that I do is called the multibaric pod. And it essentially brings you into elevation, and it has 200 to 400 fluctuation in elevation, and it creates, imagine this, it squeezes the limb, from the inside, and it squeezes him hard, and then it releases, and it squeezes and releases. And what it does is essentially desensitize the limb. Like it does a variety of other things, such as oxygenation and all of those things, wound healing and all those things. But for me, the biggest advantage is the desensitization, because that's going to be a critical piece of the prosthetic journey. If your limb is super sort of sensitive, it's very difficult. To a certain extent, some people refuse to take the pain that you need to be willing to take in order to be able to wear a prosthetic for extended periods of time. And so some people will even go to the length or to the level of having a mid-thigh amputation done because their residual limb, trans-tibial, is too painful. And so for me, desensitization has been a massive piece of this, because I've had so much neuropathy and so much neurological pain that I was concerned with how I would fare with a prosthetic. And so I've been doing all these things to get the limb to be less sensitive. I've been playing with it with all kinds of different surfaces, like grit, not sandpaper, but different textures and things, just to make sure that from a neurological standpoint, I'm desensitizing it, and I'm doing a great job at it. So a couple of days ago, I took a dumper with my stupid crutches because I was on mud, and my crutches sort of didn't give a hell, and they went, in two different directions, and I ended up falling straight down on my stump. Now, I had fallen before at the pool. As you might imagine, it was all slippery and it slipped. But in that case, it only went one side, so I was able to kind of turn my back, and I ended up on my back like a turtle, and I kept my limb up, so I was able to avoid contacting the ground. But on the latest one, on the hike, I fell stomp first right on the ground, as if my foot was still attached to my leg, and that was not a lot of fun, if I say so.
So wearing a prosthetic, you don't have your prosthetic yet?
I do not. But right now, the good news is I'm 4 weeks in advance, so I will be starting. I will be starting like in the next week or so.
So wearing one, like, is that always going to come with a level of pain on the stump, or will it over time kind of just desensitize?
So it seems to depend who you ask. And I find that, generally speaking, most amputees will have times where their stump is hurting, whether by way of friction or because they have a new socket that necessarily doesn't jive with their body type or with their residual limb, or perhaps they're pushing. You look at guys like, say, Nick Lavery, who was a Green Beret and lost his leg, and he had 3-inch of girdle on the right side, and he has a full prosthetic and went back to active combat. Well, they suggest that you wear the prosthetic for, say, 3, 4, 5 hours a day at the most. Nick Lavery was running it for 18-hour days with a 100-pound pack, and he was doing it in the mountains, right? Like, so it depends who you talk to, and it depends the makeup of that person. Like, what kind of pain are they willing to take? What kind of pain are they used to? All of those things. So it's really difficult for me to know until I set my leg into a prosthetic, because I don't know how I'm going to react to it. But I can tell you this: the people that try to save themselves the pain are generally paying over time. And so I think it's important that you take a reasonable amount of pain, so that you may make the long gain sort of worth it, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's kind of shift gears and talk about like a return to jiu-jitsu. Yeah. What are your aspirations long term? You had mentioned previously off air about returning to competition, maybe even doing jiu-jitsu competition. What are your plans for the future, and what's the timeline look like?
So this is where things get a little bit more complicated. So I have 2 surgeries coming up right now. I have a shoulder surgery in May and shoulder surgery on the other shoulder in July. And so I have 2. So let me get this straight. You spend 20 years in a job, or 23 years in a job, and you spend 12 years in tactical operation. As glamorous as this sounds, you are guaranteed to be screwed up. And I was a breacher, so I was carrying a ton of weight for many, many years, and doing all kinds of violent execution of anything with my limbs. And as a result of that, and being under load consistently, and the way I train compounded all of that, made me sort of pay the consequences, which are my body is breaking down. I'm 46 years old now. My left shoulder needs surgery badly, and it has for 10 years. My right shoulder does also. And so I love striking, and I have been unable to engage in real upper body striking. So I can do like sort of, straight punches and things, but there's a lot of things that I can't do because my shoulders are impeded, but also are very painful. Even framing in jiu-jitsu is very painful, and it has been for at least 5 years. And so there were times in my jiu-jitsu journey in the last 5 years where I would find myself in a position where I couldn't even frame away, or establish a solid frame so that I could move away from a position. And so, as much as I want to do all kinds of stuff right now, unfortunately, I have to deal with my shoulders first. That is the primary piece, because otherwise going to a jiu-jitsu competition right now would be doing in one of those shoulders for sure, if not something else. And so
what are the shoulder injuries?
Yeah, so it's kind of complicated, but where the humerus attaches to the bone, there's a sort of like an overuse sort of mechanism that occurred there, and essentially there's little remnants of bones and little fragments and little things. So they want to go in there and clean the little cup, and then they want to reattach the bicep tendons, which generally attaches straight into the shoulder, or naturally attaches to the shoulder, and they want to bring it back down to attach it lower on the arm. And that serves a few purposes, but one of the purpose is that athletes my age that have been doing heavy pull-ups for many, many years will have eventually a bicep tear. That's almost inevitable. And if you look at some of the savages that we have even here locally, it happens all the time. Jesse Sahota was an example of that recently. I had 5 or 6 teammates on the team, older guys, savages, boom, shoulder, bicep tear. And so the surgeon has suggested that bringing the tendon down and attaching it in a proper anchor point is going to make it much less likely to tear. So I said, perfect, let's do that at the same time. And so they're doing that. And then the next shoulder is the exact same sort of mechanism of injury, all of the stuff that I did under heavy loads with velocity. And so the problem with the shoulder is the arm will be in a sling for 8 weeks. So think of it this way. Right now, I just came out of the amputation. I am building my strength and conditioning. I am getting myself in tip-top shape. By the time I'm in tip-top shape, I'm going to shoulder surgery. Then I'm going to have 8 weeks of being in a sling. So I'm going to obviously regress in a way. I'm going to do everything I can around the shoulder injury, but let's call a spade a spade. It's going to be highly limiting. So I'm going to essentially regress, and then I'm going to get my fitness back up again where it needs to be so that I can enter the next surgery. And then when I get the next surgery, I'm going to be 8 to 10 weeks again recovering until I can start training again to bring myself back to where I've been twice before in the last 6 months, right? And some people might say, why would you do that? Because the more in shape you are, the better it is to go into surgery. That's why. Mm-hmm. And it makes everything better. In fact, my fitness saved my life on the first series of surgeries. I was rocking a 40,000 UL of creatine kinase, which is a compound that when muscle breaks down into your body, it starts filtering through the liver, through the kidneys. And eventually it overruns the kidneys. And I was in dialysis range at the level of creatine kinase that I was in. But because I was engaged in functional training so much, and I was used to elevated creatine kinase level, my body did not really react as it would normally if you weren't. So if somebody was completely fresh and they never had elevated creatine kinase level, and this happened, this could be something that would be catastrophic. Whereas for me, it wasn't. So the doctor essentially said to me, your training saved your life. So it saved my life on an operational standpoint during my years in the teams. It saved my life post team, in a medical setting. And so now I am hard convinced, right? Like there's no doubt that that's the case. And so as hard as it is to climb back up that mountain every single time, that is what's going to happen, even if it happens 175 times. Like I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to keep doing the things that I need to do so that I maximize and optimize my ability to recover. Once I'm done with all of that, now we're talking. This is when that I trust with my life. And, you didn't mention that in the beginning, but as a purple and brown, and it was all about you. Like you've made the massive difference in my jiu-jitsu journey. And I think that I want to work with you specifically when I come back to jiu-jitsu in a competitive mindset. I want to come back to you and I want to do privates with you. I want you to help me develop my game, all of those things. I trust you, like nobody else for that. And so that's the plan. But we are probably realistically a year and a half away from that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that's a huge honor, and obviously, I want to do that. I'm already thinking of I know you've got two shoulder surgeries, which, shoulders are very complex joints. It's going to take a lot of rehab, and if anyone can do that, it's you. But I'm already thinking okay, what kind of jiu-jitsu works for somebody who's missing the leg from the knee down? Like what kind of passing works? What kind of submission attacks work? What doesn't work? Have you thought about that? And what sort of things do you think would work and wouldn't work? Like I have my own ideas of techniques and systems that I think would be most effective and wouldn't be effective, but sort of where do you see your game going when you return to the mat? What kind of things do you think are going to be very effective and what kind of things do you think wouldn't be effective? And I understand that's a very open, big question.
Mm-hmm. So thankfully, a vast majority of my game is butterfly based. Right. And that's single butterfly or regular butterfly, all of those things. Now, I kind of lost the X. I think, I can still dabble in it, but obviously there isn't going to be a hook there. So it's not going to give me the proper purchase. But here's the thing with me. When I look at competing, I look at it differently. I look at competing to make myself uncomfortable, to put myself in a fight, because I've been retired for 2 years and I haven't been in a fight. And the less you're in a fight, the less you're capable of being in a fight. And so for me, I still have a combative mindset when I think about jiu-jitsu. I don't have a competitive mindset. First of all, I'm not very competitive. And I know people are going to look at this and say, what? That doesn't make sense. But it's actually the case. I'm very competitive with myself, and I like to elevate. So if I see Matt Kwan doing something amazing, I'm going to try to do something amazing. I'm going to try to elevate. So I let people around me that are competitive elevate me. But I personally, really, I'm not that competitive. So I don't need to go to a jiu-jitsu tournament, and if I don't win, it's the end of the world or anything like that. But what I do, the win conditions for me in jiu-jitsu is combatives. I want to fight. So I have to think combatively. I can't think necessarily what would the landscape look like, or what are some of the things that I would have to be able to do to win and be at the top of the podium, right? It's more about, I want to get in a fight and I want to do decent. It's what I'm looking at. And so for me, top game, my top game, having the ability to use my upper body and maximize how I do and how I achieve my chest to chest and all my control and be able to use my upper body in a way that's more conducive to maintaining control on the top is a big piece of that. As far as guard recovery goes, as you know, I always love my guard. I believe that my butterfly is not gone anywhere. And I think that I should be able to do a lot of things from there. Now we're going to have to develop what this exactly looks like and all of those things, but my sweeping ability, all of those things almost came massively from my butterfly abilities. And so whether or not I want to change this or we want to change this, I'm open to suggestion. I'm open to all of that stuff. But what we need to understand, and what even you and I have that conversation, is that my win conditions is fighting. That's what I want. And so, as much as I would love to be on a podium and have a nice medal around my neck, I'm not going to do something that would get me killed in the street to get that, if that makes any sense. I prefer sort of catering my game to something happens. I need to be fighting somebody hard and I need to be winning, versus, you're going to do something tactically or strategically to win. But if you actually did that and strikes were allowed or whatever, you would be paying dearly for that. And so those are all things that I have to consider. And so this is something that, as somebody that, like you, that loves to win, this is something that, obviously it's a conversation we need to have, right? Like how do we maximize my ability and my chances of winning, maintaining the integrity of what my win conditions are?
Mm-hmm. Right away, like just as a coach, and I've done a private lesson before with someone who was missing a leg. It was actually it was very interesting for me as a coach, and I didn't really know how to go about doing it because I have both legs. So I was thinking, how am I going to modify this lesson for somebody who is missing the leg from the knee down, very similar to you? And it was actually a great experience, both for me and for them. I actually saw this person later on. We were at I believe it was a Naga down in the States. We both traveled down there, and I saw this dude heel hook a guy. This guy with one leg heel hooked a guy with two legs. And I was like, holy shit, that's fucking awesome. I believe that a lot of, there are a lot of, I want to say pros, but the leg entanglement game won't get too heavily affected from a negative standpoint if your mechanics are good and if you understand how to leg pummel. I think the main disadvantage to having one leg in a leg entanglement situation, again, this is all just my perception because I've never done jiu-jitsu with a stump, but I think the biggest disadvantage is you don't have the ability to use one of your legs to defend the other. But other than that, there's also advantages. For example, you can't leg lock that leg. There's no end of the lever to attack. You can still create good wedges just with your thighs and with your adductor muscles and with your hip flexors. So I feel like creating genuine braking pressure will not be an issue at all. So I'm actually really looking forward to that. When you talk about top game, the thing that will be greatly limited will be standing passing. That's how I look at it. Obviously it's going to be tough to keep base on top with standing passing. So I think the majority of your passing will transition to tight passing, right? Like I think body lock passing would be incredibly effective, and body lock passing leading to half guard passing would be very impressive. Like if you can get half guard chest to chest on someone and passing specifically to a side that forces them to try to trap your stump as the half guard leg, it'll be easier to pass that leg, and you still have a free leg to base out on, so you can maintain your balance. So it's interesting, just as a coach, thinking about how to modify somebody's game for these circumstances, because there's pros and there's cons in it, and there's obviously like upper body things. There's, I think, a lot of things that we can still do with our upper body, and it is going to be like it's something for me that actually gets me excited, because it's just another way that we can explore the sport in an untapped way that just hasn't really been done yet. It's just not something you see. It's not super common. But I love the idea of the challenge. Are you thinking about fully embracing, like you had mentioned judo and boxing and whatever is and mostly, I would say, if I'm not mistaken, the majority of your jiu-jitsu training has been gi based. Am I incorrect in saying that?
No, you're right. I mean, my competitive career, so to speak, which wasn't extensive by any means in the first three belts, was no-gi mostly. Like at the time I competed,
No-gi.
I competed almost exclusively in no-gi actually. But my jiu-jitsu based daily operation was gi based, right? But also,
are you thinking about?
I was going to say, I also took my freaking gi top off and did no-gi all the time and the way I sort of adjusted my grip, even in the gi, I was using a lot of no-gi grip all the time, because so that I can have, proxy and levers and things that I could use without having material needed. And that was simply because you don't have that all the time, right? In a combative setting. Yeah. And so generally speaking, and you've mentioned this to me before, you said, your no-gi is harder to deal with, and it's kind of funny, because a lot of people that roll no-gi all the time, when we rolled in the gi and say they were coming up a bit short, they would say, can we do no gi? And then I would do no gi, but I'm actually a bit better, aside from all of the complexities of the leg entanglement game, right? Like, so yeah, defensive abilities, all those things are there, but I wasn't nearly as well versed in all the leg lock systems and everything that you are now at the forefront of. But I think that there is massive value in doing that. And it's an age-old argument, right? And for me, it's like, this is a conversation we don't even need to have, as far as that goes. What keeps you on the mats? That's all I care about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. Okay, let's wrap up this interview with a couple of quick questions, okay? These are quick questions. Don't spend too long answering them. Just give me a couple of quick words here. Okay, you can travel back in time and talk to Seb Lavoie when he was 18 years old. What kind of advice do you give that person?
Remove external validation from your vocabulary.
Who's going to win the next election in the States, Trump or Biden? Explain Joe Biden in 3 words. I don't think he can do it.
Dude, I'm not answering this. Like, I don't know. Incompetent and valid. Time to go. How about that?
Explain Trump in 3 words.
It's hard, man. I can't do 3. I can't do 3 words, because it's actually quite complex. Like, but I will say this: if it's between the two, the prospect is we have seen what happens to the U.S. when this isn't the case, and so we can't have that. But with 300 million people living there, they should be able to find better. But I don't think they can somehow, and so It is. It has to be what it has to be.
Is the democratic elective system real?
Define real.
Is it a show? Is it an illusion?
Yeah, I believe to a certain extent it is. I mean, I think that they're so stifled by their processes and the things that are in place that are actually counterproductive to the democratic system application. I think that we're 100% in an illusion, and there is no real control aside from control coming from behind the scene. I believe that.
Is the voting process 100% legitimate as they sell it to us?
Well, I think it's proven not to be, so I don't need to speculate on that. There has been several examples and instances where it was highly questionable and it wasn't highly questioned.
How do you feel about Justin Trudeau? Keep in mind, this is a guy who protected Justin Trudeau.
Yeah, I did. And ultimately, it comes down to this. When you're a professional, it's more about not messing up on your shift, and it has to do with whoever is in the chair. I don't care about that. I just don't want shit to happen when I'm responsible. That's a very different headspace to be in. I didn't do any politic at the time. I really didn't care. What is my job? My job is this, and if I fail it, it's me that fails, not who's being a victim of that. I absolutely believe that Trudeau destroyed this country. He literally destroyed this country. I have never in my life considered leaving this country, and I have been thinking only about this for the last probably 2 years.
And I don't think you're alone. I've had the same thoughts. We're basically the laughing stock of the world, honestly. And I remember growing up being so proud to be Canadian. I remember they would march you into the school in the assembly. We would all sing the national anthem, and there was a sense of pride. There really was a sense of patriotism, even up until recently. But after Trudeau got in, it almost became, I'm not going to use the word ashamed, because I think there's a lot of great things in Canada, and sometimes we lose sight of the beauty of our people. But at the same time, I am somewhat embarrassed of what we have become, and I think many Canadians would echo that same thing. Even even like the leftists that I know, the people who are very, very progressive, don't like Trudeau anymore, and that's telling. Do you think he's going to win the next election?
No, I do not. But here's something that people need to consider. When I became a team leader on a team, I started with having one responsibility. That's prior to be a team leader. Okay, so I'm coming through the ranks, and I'm getting a responsibility. When I sort of achieve the outcome in a preferable manner, I'm being given a little bit more responsibility, and a little bit more responsibility, and a little bit more responsibility. And over the course of 10 years, I developed a tracking history of competence in leading men in operational settings, right? Eventually awarding me a team leader's position. What had Trudeau done to develop as a leader before being elected the first time? Nothing at all. There was no leadership bones in his body. There was no relevant experience. There was none of those things. You can't appoint a leader in a critical leadership role that has no leadership experience. So if you ask me, I predicted exactly what was going to happen the first time he got elected. And what really infuriated me was that people were essentially saying he's got nice hair, and that's a big reason why some people elected him, because he was a good looking dude. So they say. I wouldn't know anything about that. But the fact is,
oh, come on.
The fact is that if we look at competence-based appointment, this was never one. And that is what you get.
Mm-hmm. Again, segueing into my next question, can you describe a good leader?
Dude, there's so many factors that are going to play into a good leader, but essentially it's based on competence, having the ability to do the work. It's based on emotional intelligence, having the ability to establish connection with the people that you are leading. It's about having strategic and critical thinking abilities. It's about having ownership and being accountable. All of those things are absolutely absent from that man. In fact, if you look back in time with, say, responses to the media questions, and let's not even start talking about the media, but the point I'm making is that guy was never held accountable for absolutely anything in his entire life. Just look at the debacle in the parliamentary session with the SS dude that was somewhat invited in there, and who left? The speaker left. The speaker became the scapegoat for the person that should have been held accountable for that. It's the same. It's going to be the same for the Emergency Act. It's going to be the same for another thing. Like, that guy has never been held accountable to any sort of standard whatsoever. And so accountability and decisiveness are two things that go hand in hand with a good leader. You need to, if you are decisive and you're making some calls, you're going to make some tough calls that are not necessarily always popular, but you're going to have to. That's just the way it is. But if there is an understanding of your true character, and if there is accountability there, you're going to be able to get some buy-in, and you're going to be able to, have people's trust. And when you do that, instead of becoming complacent, you're going to focus even more on not disappointing in your application. So, to give you an example, once my guys trusted me to the point where I could have them do, almost anything, although they would challenge certain things, which is absolutely what you want from your crew. They knew that if I didn't have time to articulate something, there was a reason why I was doing it. They knew my character. As a result of that, and as a leader, it responsibilized me to do better, to be better, to protect them, all of those things. But if you start, kind of going the other way around, we have a problem. So, I mean, all of those things are completely absent from that guy.
Was COVID an over-exaggeration? Our response to COVID?
Initial response, probably not. Based on the intelligence at hand after, absolutely. So risk assessment wise, once the risk assessment developed, and now when we talk about risk assessment, we talk about risk assessment that involves all of the things. So let's start talking about, suicide rates. Let's start talking about domestic violence, drug overdose. All of those things need to be taken into consideration to see if your actions are reasonable in light of the circumstance you're facing. That never happened. And so, yes, initially, when we didn't know anything, absolutely, I'm all in. Lock it down and hell, see what's going on, right? And let's take a tactical pause. Let's bring the experts in. Let's start looking around. But once you start digging your heels in, because now it's become a matter of principle and it's no longer evidence-based, you lost me. And we did that. Solid.
Did you get the vaccine?
I did.
Do you regret it?
Yeah, well, from a medical standpoint, I might at some point, but I don't, because I made a decision that I wasn't going to listen. For me, it was about living. And I'm like, if I have a year of good life, I'm in. Let's go. Like, I do not want to get jailed for a year. I do not want to not be able to do certain things. So I made a decision, but I respected everybody else's decision. I never told someone you should get vaccinated or whatever the case may be. I took the risk upon myself, and I realized that this might go sideways, but I did it anyway so that I can do the things that I was wanting to do. And I hardly changed my lifestyle during COVID, And so, yes, I did, and there's nothing I can do about it. So I can't be like, well, I wish I didn't, and all of those things.
From your unprofessional opinion, just as a citizen, is the COVID vaccine safe and effective in your opinion?
Well, I think it's proven to have some serious side effects. Let's sort of get off from the COVID vaccine itself, and let's just look at the mortality rate without it, right? And so that's kind of where my logic comes in. It's like, well, okay, we increased a certain amount of we've taken on a certain amount of risk for a virus that has a 99% survival rate, and this is why this is based upon the numbers that we were provided, that we know a lot of them are tinted, right? So we know that a lot of people that died of secondary conditions or conditions that are unrelated. We also know that a bunch of people died from being put on respirators, which was the first thing they did initially. And so for me, The answer is no. You can't justify. You can't justify even the amount of vaccine injuries that we have had on account of the 99% survival rate. Would that apply to people in a very, very high risk population? I don't know, but that's my thoughts.
Do you think the COVID pandemic, I don't even like using that word, but we'll call it a pandemic. Do you think it was in any way planned or pre-orchestrated?
Dude, when it comes to conspiracy, and I call it disrespectfully because maybe it isn't, right? But when I think conspiratorial, the last thing I think of is the government ability to do that. Dude, we can't even agree on buying pens. We can't get our ducks lined up enough for two people to think the same way, or for two people to pull in the same direction, for somebody not wanting to get recognized, for somebody not trying to take credit for something. So for me to think that a government entity get everybody on board and does something completely catastrophic that will also affect their family and the people they know and all this stuff, I have a really, really hard time with that. I'm not suggesting it's completely impossible, but I have a hard time with that from a conspiratorial standpoint. Was it planned? Is something that I absolutely have no evidence to support for and against.
So earlier you said, based on the initial reaction to COVID, you thought that it wasn't an overreaction. You thought, bring in the experts, let's take a tactical pause on the economy, let's take precautions, etc. We saw how that turned into, we saw how flattening the curve for 2 weeks turned into whatever, a long time, right? Knowing that and seeing that, if something like this happens again, does it make sense to take the same precaution, knowing that it can be over-exaggerated, or that the reaction can be extended, that people can lose their livelihoods and their businesses, the economy can tank as we saw it did, whether or not you think it was controlled or pre-orchestrated? If something like this happens again, should we take the exact same precautions, or should we be wary of like a contagion narrative again?
See, this is an interesting question, because really what needs to happen that never happened during COVID is accountability. And trust me, dude, I come from a place like when I lived in Quebec in the 90s, we had one of the biggest biker wars to ever wage in Hells Angels history, between the Hells Angels and the Rock Machine. Right. And it took years for people were shooting each other with freaking rocket launchers. People were putting vehicle-borne IEDs, blowing up each other's girlfriends, doing all this stuff. Nobody cared. One day they killed a kid, an 8-year-old, in a vehicle-borne IED. Jeep exploded, killed this kid. Within 3 months, we had absolutely everything sorted. The only thing that's changed was the people demanding accountability. That's it. Show us what you got. Let us partake in the process. You are not giving us all kinds of direction and all kinds of things without the feedback loop, without accountability. The problem during the entire pandemic is there was never that. We were told by one of our clowns to use glory holes to have sex, and people kept listening to her. I'm like, are you kidding me? How do we get on a united front and demand accountability, demand evidence, demand all of those things? We cannot. The problem that we have right now is we so comfortable as a society that most people, this was the most fear they encountered in their entire lifetime, whereas I was as safe as I ever had. It's actually the safest I'd ever been because I wasn't on a team. So I had no issue looking at it from a critical standpoint, because that's not scary compared to the shit I was doing a couple months before, right? Mm-hmm. And so the more comfortable we get, the less likely we are to be adamant with our ask for accountability. That is our problem. We are the problem. They are not the problem. We are.
Have we walked on the moon?
I have no clue. I hope so.
Because if not,
it's a freaking awesome, elaborate scheme. But I hope so. I don't know. I did.
9/11. 9/11. Yeah. Inside job, or maybe not an inside job, but perhaps they were aware of it and they let it happen. Let me rephrase the question. Is the 9/11 narrative true exactly how they portray it?
It depends who they are, and it depends what portrayal of it you're.
The official narrative given to us by the Western media.
Well, we know that that's not the case based on evidence alone. I mean, you have an insurgency group or a group that's associated to Taliban, which is an official government at the time, which means that what this theoretically would have been an act of war. How did it become a terrorist attack, right? And not a declaration of war, but we yet ended up in Afghanistan anyways. And so this is a very interesting event and a very interesting chain of event. I don't know is the answer, and nobody does. And here's a problem from somebody with a master of international security. Here's one of the problems that we have. Well, there's various problems, but one of them is very critical, is that the governments have the ability to maintain veto or to not disclose certain things on account of sort of security or securitization or whatever you want to call it. So say, for example, the war in Ukraine. While the U.S. is engaged in a war in Ukraine, this is a proxy war as far as they're concerned. But the American public doesn't think they're at war. But the U.S. government is. But the U.S. government was going to recession. War makes money. They decide to go and assist in Ukraine. This is an oversimplification, okay? But the point I'm making is, because we are not privy to all of the information, unfortunately, what we have is sporadic pieces. I'm going to show you a movie, and every 5 seconds, I'm going to pause it, and I'm going to let 6 minutes go, and I'm going to bring you back into the movie at the end. Can you make sense of it completely? The answer is no, because some of the information is available, some isn't, and it's you can't make sense of something that's so sort of scattered, and so it's very, very difficult to do that. And so I believe that if you ask me if what's his face Bin Laden deserved his fate, and the Taliban regime and some of their daily operation deserve to say die, oh hell yeah. There's no question. There's no questioning that. And if you think that Saddam Hussein didn't deserve his fate, but Iraq was a completely different story. Should have we been there in the first place? The answer is no. But did Saddam deserve to die? 100%. So those are very complex sort of situations. And to be honest with you, I don't know that anybody knows exactly how this unfolded.
Do you know about Tower 7?
I've heard. I do not engage actively in the sort of conspiracy theory realm of researching the conspiracy theory realm so much, but I have heard. Yes.
Why did that building fall on 9/11?
I have no idea.
Because I think a lot of people forget that building just randomly fell. It's actually on tape, but not part of the narrative, really.
So
that's where a lot of people will say the steel beams shouldn't melt with jet fuel, which I agree with. The passport of the hijacker being found on the sidewalk, things like that. Those are fishy, but the third building falling is the thing where I'm like, okay, that makes no sense. What is that all?
Yeah, but it feeds right into what I was just saying. Is if you legally, as a government, if you legally have the ability to restrict information, and you take pieces of things away from the public, from the American public, from the world, how is the public making sense of the things that you are now hiding? On account of, and whatever reason you give yourself. And so for me, there's a great interview with a CIA expert and on the Sean Ryan podcast that speaks about some of those mechanisms that are in place. And it had me to question, can we even affect counterterrorism or terrorism? Can we have effective counterterrorism strategy based upon the fact that we are given bits and pieces of information? Now let's go a step further and let's talk about transnational crime. Well, transnational crime is funding terrorism on a large scale, but it's a $4.3 trillion business. Who is going to stop that? Who stands to gain from stopping terrorism? And does that mean that guys like me are 100% obsolete because we'll always be? Likely. And it took me a master's degree to realize that I'm useless, right? And so the point I'm making is there is so much more to the picture that we don't have. That's the danger of conspiracy, is because some of this stuff is real, some of this stuff isn't. And when you try to put it together, it's not going to make sense because information is not there. From an investigative standpoint, it's a big problem, you know.
What advice do you think every young man should have nowadays?
Control your emotions. Don't let them run the show.
Describe in a couple of words our current mainstream media.
Atrocious.
Describe pornography in today's society.
Instant gratification garbage.
Seb Lavoie, thank you for the interview, buddy. I don't have anything else for you.
Awesome.
If you're still with us, thank you for listening to the podcast. Seb, I'd like to take this time to just give you a chance to push anything, social media or products or services, buddy.
Yeah, sounds good, guys. Listen, if somebody wants to get in touch with me, but the best way to do it is probably my personal Instagram, which sounds weird from a business standpoint, but so be it. It seems to be the case. And so I'm assuming you're going to link it in the notes there, Matt?
Yep. I'll just get you to send me any links or anything. I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, roger that. So that's going to be at SLAVCCMDR, SLAVCCMDR. So that's my primary function. So if you're looking at, and I do have a website as well, ravenstrategic with a K.com. That has all kinds of services on there, public speaking, all kinds of coaching services. There's a million things there. So if you have any questions, you can build any custom courses, do anything to help somebody optimize their performance. That's all I got.
Fantastic stuff. And if you want to support the show, please like, share, subscribe, leave comments in the comment section. It helps my algorithm a lot. Plus, you can see links in the bottom how you can support the show through subscribing to my online academy, donating to my PayPal, checking out the online merchandise store. Other than that, that is the conversation with Sebastien Lavoie. Thank you so much for coming in today, brother. I love you a long time.
Love you too, bro. See you guys.
All right, guys. Remember, Everyday Jiu Jitsu Podcast is everything you need to know about Jiu Jitsu. Take care.